The Russian economy is very dependent on fossil fuels. Exports of gas and oil account for nearly 50% of the Russian government's budget. But both these industries are coming under threat from both Western sanctions and the own decisions of Russia to cut off gas supplies to Europe. The big question is, can the Russian economy cope with a decline in its fossil fuel industry? Can they pivot away to other industries? Is the economy sufficiently flexible to deal with a big change that is definitely coming? In this video, we'll look at why the fossil fuel industry is declining and what, if anything, the Russian economy can do about it. So first of all, if we take natural gas, the big news at the moment is that Russia has cut off Nord Stream 1 to Europe. And this is a very big source of gas for Europe, causing them problems. But also, it's a self-inflicted wound because Russia gains a very significant revenue from selling natural gas to Europe. And all these pipelines are in place. Now, the importance of that is that it's very difficult to shift natural gas production to other countries. And so already on the Finnish border, they're witnessing Russian gas wells being capped. That means burning the excess gas because they can't be sold and it can't be stored. The problem for the Russian economy is that when you're so reliant on exports of fossil fuels, it's very difficult to make a transition to a different style of economy. Now, to some extent, it is true that economies are very adaptable and often more flexible than we might imagine. One example, after Western sanctions were introduced, the Russian car industry went into mothball. For 2 months, no production was made. But recently the Lada factory reopened, selling cars once again. And that shows the adaptability to some extent of a car industry, although it is worth pointing out that the cars being sold are without a lot of the extras that you might expect. So no air conditioning, no SBS brakes, no airbags. And this is because they can't source the imports from abroad. So although the car industry is still going, it's going to be quite uncompetitive in a global market. But the bigger question is, if Russian fossil fuels decline, will the economy be able to readjust? And there are many factors which will make it very difficult. There's actually something known as the Dutch disease. The economists termed this in the 1970s after the experience of the Netherlands. In the 1960s, the Netherlands discovered lots of natural gas, and they did very well because they could export natural gas, get lots of tax revenue and export revenue. And this caused an appreciation in the Dutch guilder, and the economy did well. But the problem is that when you do very well in fossil fuel extraction, it harms other areas of the economy because the strong exchange rate makes it difficult for other exporters, but also the fossil fuel industry attracts all the capital investment because it's the most profitable. So other areas of the economy got starved. And so when fossil fuels declined in Netherlands in the 70s, the rest of the economy was very weak. It had fallen behind its international competitors. So something similar on a much bigger scale is happening in Russia because fossil fuels are the dominant source of the economy, and they have been ever since the transition from a communist economy to free market. And the problem is that you can be very inefficient, corrupt, but still do well from an economy based on fossil fuels. We could describe the Russian economy as kind of a crony capitalism, in that a few wealthy people own most of the resources, and as long as you have the right connections with the top, with Putin, with Kremlin, then you can be quite profitable. There is not a culture of entrepreneurship and flexibility and being internationally competitive in industries like services and manufacturing, because there's no need. We can make all this profit from fossil fuel extraction. So if this quickly evaporates, then the economy isn't ready. It's not got the basic infrastructure, the social protections and the legal regulations that would encourage kind of a more productive capitalist-based economy. And unfortunately, you turn on the news and often you hear about top Russian oil executives falling out of hospital windows. And this indicates the degree of corruption and violence involved in the fossil fuel-based economy. So a fossil fuel-based economy very much distorts the rest of the economy. And this is made worse by many factors facing the Russian economy. One of the big ones is a demographic shock. Between 2020 and 2021, Russia lost 1 million people. And this was partly due to COVID, but also high death rates and also a very low birth rate. Russia has a birth rate of about 1.5 compared to a replacement ratio of 2.1. Now, it's true that Russia isn't the only economy in the world to be facing that kind of birth rate. But since the start of 2022, there's been a big, you could say, emigration of many of the youngest, brightest, richest, most entrepreneurial workers who feel the Russian economy has very poor prospects. And so they've moved to other countries. And this means that in the future, going forward, the Russian economy will lack some of these young, skilled, entrepreneurial workers, which are key to developing a diversified economy. Another new development is the G7 have introduced an oil price cap on Russian oil. The aim of this is to reduce the price of Russian oil below the global equilibrium, so the West avoids excess prices but reduces the revenue going to Russia. Now, it's not clear how effective this will be because Russia have said they'll try and find a way around it, and since sanctions were introduced in February 2022, Russian oil revenues have been quite strong because they've been able to sell to China and India at a discount, it should be pointed out. But nevertheless, they have been able to sell, and often Russian oil is then refined into petroleum products, which are then sold back to the West. So far, sanctions haven't been too effective. But if a price cap is more effective, and if it squeezes the Russian oil industry, and it could be that global prices start to fall as we enter into recession, and so this again will harm the Russian oil industry. And also there is a long-term problem faced by the Russian oil industry in that they won't attract the same multinational investment that they used to. And so therefore, Russian oil production is forecast to decrease over the next 10 years. And this will be a major blow to Russian oil revenues and tax revenues, and it will make the economy very different. But again, it's not clear whether they'll be able to successfully diversify the economy, because the oil economy is very simple. Even if you have a lot of corruption and inefficiency in the economy, you can still make quite a lot of money selling oil because it's hard to do badly. I mean, basically it's extracting it from the ground and then selling it. So if the oil price cap and the EU and UK control of insurance is quite important, but if the oil price cap is effective, then this may hasten the decline in the oil industry. And the concern from a Russian point of view is that the economy is really not ready to replace those tax and export revenues with anything else. And although it appears that sanctions haven't had too much of an impact, there's a few things I'd like to say. Firstly, since 2014, when the West introduced quite, you could say, weak sanctions, I mean, the general view is that the sanctions after the Crimean invasion were very weak and ineffective. But if you look at Russian GDP, you can see quite a significant fall in Russian GDP since 2014. So if even minor sanctions have this big effect on reducing GDP, what will the 2022 sanctions, which are much deeper and have affected many more companies and industries? So it could be quite significant. Also, we shouldn't underestimate the impact of sanctions on deterring Western multinational investment. Thousands of companies have withdrawn from Russia, and this is pretty much permanent. Now, these sanctions don't apply to many Asian countries like China and India, but even so, the interesting thing is that Chinese companies have often voluntarily cut back on exports to Russia because it doesn't want to fall foul of Western sanctions. So without this multinational investment from abroad, it's going to be very difficult to diversify the economy. Now, it is true that you can to some extent have an autarky economy, an economy where you rely on your own investment. But in the globalized world that we live, it will be very hard for any Russian industry to be significantly competitive without this kind of global integration that most companies and industries rely on. So the gas industry could decline very quickly because the Russian government is actually forcing it by cutting off Nord Stream 1. Oil revenues are likely to last longer because there's still quite strong demand for Russian oil, even with sanctions and efforts to reduce it. However, the long-term outlook is very bleak because the Russian economy lacks many of the necessary ingredients to be able to diversify the economy and to develop new industries that can replace fossil fuels. Now, it is worth repeating the point that often economies prove to be more adaptable than we might imagine. But even so, it will be quite a shock because fossil fuels have been an easy source of revenue. They've been able to coexist with this strong levels of corruption and lack of entrepreneurial spirit. But when that is ended, it will be very hard to replace the same kind of revenues with very new industries.